Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about dead stop training. And I mean, you'll see examples throughout this video of me doing pause benching, box squats, obviously deadlifts to where we reset on the floor on every rep. So these are examples of dead stop training because these are exercises where we can have a terminal stop. Now, can the same thing be applied to something like a pull-up? Sure. Can we even apply it to rows where we don't touch the floor? Yes, absolutely. I like to do it sometimes on seal rows, dumbbell rows, things like that. Obviously, if you row off the floor, the same thing applies to some extent. But here's the thing when it comes to dead stop training. You know, a lot of people will argue, well, you're losing the stretch reflex. You might not be getting always the best stimulus for hypertrophy. We could make arguments for that. We could also make arguments for the fact that on exercises that are capable of a true dead stop, right, that there's a completely different type of muscle activation and nervous system activation that happens. And it's my experience that this is the sort of training that tends to build just brute strength, okay? We build really serious brute strength from this type of training. And particularly when it's stuff where we have that ability to come to a terminal stop, a dead stop, a pause, and then drive it up. Now, some of this incline is if I don't think I always pause every rep because incline's a little different, but meaning it's a different lift than the bench press. But even then, I think the same thing still applies. So what happens when we have things like controlled eccentrics like that, to where we come to a stop and then we drive it off, okay? Right? We drive it from a dead stop, from a pause. We have to engage the muscles quickly, right? And in other words, it's one thing when you use a stretch reflex because then you use a rebound to cause muscle fibers to recruit, right? That's one thing, call it a myotatic reflex. And with a myotatic reflex, a stretch reflex, in theory, it does make a muscle potentially contract harder at the top. There's been some data suggesting that over the decades, right? So that stretch reflex is something. But the dead stop training tends to force whatever the primary mover is from that bottom position to fire instantly. Okay, it makes the upper threshold motor units have to activate really quickly. Because when we look at a lot of these bottom position movements, we're put into a mechanical disadvantage position for those muscles. Okay, so when we're on a box squat and you look at what's happening with the quads, and then we pause on the box for a second, right? The hips loosen, we've disengaged the ability of the hips and the hip flexors, right? So then when we re-engage everything, we have to use the glutes and the quads to drive instantly, okay? We have to use them to drive instantly. In order for that to happen, if we don't want to just stick on the box, what do we have to do? We have to reach those highest threshold motor units instantly. We have to use them instantly from a stretch position, a disadvantaged position. Otherwise, we don't get the weight accelerated, okay? And it teaches us to accelerate quicker, right? And that's the main thing. People are like, well, doesn't the stretch reflex do that? No, the stretch reflex teaches you how to rebound and recruit muscle fibers. All this pause work, it teaches you to use muscle fibers to build faster speed immediately because you have no speed going. So again, if the highest threshold muscle fibers are not activated quickly enough, we can't build enough momentum. Okay, we can't build enough momentum to have anything left to follow through as we start coming up. So by doing all of this and we come to those pauses on everything, and on benching, some of these are a little slower, a little bit faster pauses. A lot of times if we start doing long pauses, like on that last rep there, right, we take that little bit longer of a pause. Okay, it forces the pectorals to fire faster because if they don't, we don't get enough speed to finish the rep. Hey, we don't get enough speed to finish the rep. Because again, we have to get the momentum. But the problem is we don't have the momentum coming from an external source. There's no bounce, there's no squish. We're using pure muscle to do it. So even then, like we're doing something like that, those long pauses, we may not be getting as much leg drive. So same thing with this incline, right? These are all controlled. There's no bounce, right? Come to a dead stop and then drive. right? So on these, when you pause like that with a fairly heavy weight, it looks slow, doesn't it? And if you were using a lightweight, that would explode up. But we don't have that option because it's too heavy. Well, heavy for different people. For me, 225 is fairly heavy on an incline. I'm not as strong as some guys out there. I'm an old man. So to me, 225 on a 45-degree incline is actually pretty dang heavy. Most I've ever hit is 10 reps with it. So on a really, really good day, the same thing, we do these box squats. You know, you got like 500 pounds on here. You have to fire everything. And if you don't, you won't get the weight moving. Same thing with your deadlifts. That's why the deadlift is such a test of brute strength. We have to fire everything quickly. So this is how we develop power. Okay? These sorts of training build power. They build high rates of force production to where you're coming from a dead stop. So I'll put it in terms that some people understand. You guys remember, used to be this thing, used to see these martial arts tricks. And I'm not necessarily an expert in martial arts, by the way. So bear with me on that. Okay, bear with me. But you would see with a lot of martial artists, you would see, where they would do that little power punch. You saw Bruce Lee used to demonstrate it. That's what we're talking about, high rate of force production, where he'd have his hand like 3 inches from someone and then punch and drive them down backwards into a chair. Okay, and he was not a big guy. But that's what we're looking at, rate of force production. This builds a different type of power because it's that ability to turn power on instantly. Okay, that sort of strength is useful in contact sports. That sort of strength is useful out on a football field. It's useful for sprinting, that first sprint off the block. Okay, but it's also useful for things like powerlifting and stuff. But it will get you strong and it'll get you jacked, right? This sort of training, keep in mind, do enough work with stuff like this. You'll get jacked. I mean, you can start doing 3 sets of flat bench and 3 sets of incline this way. For rep work, right? You'll build some pretty thick chests, maybe even some triceps. So again, it will also make you thick. It's valid hypertrophy training. It absolutely counts. But it builds brute strength. And again, it's just a different type of strength to be able to do these things from a dead stop. So the other things would be heavy glute bridges and stuff, right? Where you reset on the floor every time. That falls into that same category, guys. The same category. Okay? And especially if it's an exercise where you can't cheat. Right? You're locked into where you can't cheat your way out of the bottom. Like a pendlay row off the floor, you can. You do a seal row with a barbell or a dumbbell off of a bench where you can reach the floor. We're into the same type of training, aren't we? All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.